Welcome to Fun with History with Professor Banks. And welcome back to class, students. After a 1 week layoff because of me being on holidays, but I am back this week, and this week we're going to get into the heart of World War II. And there's a lot to cover, so let's not waste any time. Let's get to our introduction music, shall we? Welcome to Fun with History, and this week it's our 25th history lesson. This week it's part 2 on World War II. And if you can't remember 2 weeks ago, well then just go back to my last video and refresh yourself so you know what we're into right now, and that is World War II. Last week it was what led up to it, and this week we're going to take a look at the major course of the war. We're going to take a look at what shapes it up. But first, our joke of the week. And how many cat lovers are there out here? I think I know 2 or 3 people that regularly watch my videos that like cats. So this week, it is cat jokes. And it is out of this book right here on Garfield. The Garfield Big Fat Book of Jokes and Riddles. So I hope, how many people here like Garfield? Yeah, he's a pretty cool cat. Pretty funny cat. But let me share with you just a few jokes from this quickly, and then we'll get into our lesson. Okay, here's a letter. Okay, this is just a little letter. Dear Garfield, can you tell me when lilac time is? Flower child, can you tell me when lilac time is? Dear Flower child, lilac time is usually the next morning. For example, if someone asks you if you know what happened to a couple of trays of lasagna, you lie like crazy. Lilac crazy. Lilac crazy. All right. And then we got this one here. Here's Garfield hanging from a tree. What time would it be if you saw a dozen German shepherds chasing Garfield up a tree? 12 after 1. Okay. Here's another one for you. Which one is this? Dear Garfield, can you tell me what is the best way to keep leftover lasagna? Thrifty. Dear Thrifty, simply don't give any of it back. And then we go on to this one. How does Garfield feel when he's near a hamburger? Okay, there's a picture of Garfield again, near a hamburger. He relishes every moment. Okay, last one. Why did Garfield take a hammer to bed with him? So he could hit the hay. Okay. Alright, there we go. Our jokes of the week for you. Okay, so let's get moving on here, shall we? Let's get moving on. Because there is a lot to talk about here this week in Fun with History. Okay? So, without further ado, so, the first thing I want to talk about is something that Hitler used in his war strategy, and it was a very common term from World War II, and it's something that I think as historians or as people learning history, you have got to be familiar with, and that is this term here. Blitzkrieg. Okay? And as you can hear in the background, you might be able to hear it, playing the song Blitzkrieg Bop. So Blitzkrieg was a very good strategy Hitler used in the war called Lightning War. Okay? So, that was Blitzkrieg. And basically, Blitzkrieg was this, okay? Hitler would use short campaigns, use lots of weapons along a narrow front, and basically the equation was this: air power from above plus rapid movement ahead on the ground equaled no chance for the enemy to get organized. So that was what Hitler used in a lot of the war. Blitzkrieg, lightning war. Okay, so that was how he was successful, and it was very successful for quite some time. It is what he used to invade Poland. It's what he used to invade the first few countries that he invaded after Poland, and it was very successful, very precise. So Blitzkrieg, lightning war, is a term that you need to be familiar with, and something that Hitler used as a major part of his war strategy. Okay, what I'm going to do in this lesson is I'm going to try to use a method called KISS. So keep it simple, stupid. That's what it's called, KISS. So I'm going to rotate around the room with different pieces of paper and quickly go through each paper with you and make this lesson hopefully very accurate and very concise. Okay? Let's get going, shall we? On we go. Let's move. Okay, we're going to move together. Okay. Can you see that? Okay. So, this is dummy or phony war. Okay? That's what this is, the first step. Okay? So basically what happened when the war first started, many historians refer to it as the dummy or phony war, because there wasn't really much done by the Allies in almost the first year of the war. Basically, the Allies did a naval blockade of Germany, blow up. I put that, blow up. So the blockade was named to blow up Germany's economy and their war effort at the same time. But Germany was very smart when the war started, and they did not fall for that. Instead, they counteracted with U-boats in the Atlantic versus the Allies. So the Allies tried to block them. The Germans used U-boats to shoot against them. And this later turned into the Battle of the Atlantic. Okay? And cautious, half-hearted French probe into the Saarland to support Poland. That was another part of the phony war. So let's just cautiously go halfway in. Let's probe into the Saarland, which was kind of like an area just outside of Poland, to support these poor Polish people getting invaded. But meanwhile, what was happening was country gobbling was continuing by both Hitler and Mussolini, okay? Those two guys, and actually over in Japan too, countries were getting gobbled up. So, I got a very good map here for you. I want to just show this to you, okay? This is a very colorful map. This is a map of Europe in World War II. And I know there's a lot on there, but let me just explain to you briefly what was happening. Okay, so orange is Germany. So orange is every area that Germany was occupied, okay? So, coming back. Hello. I just want to make sure you can hear me. So the orange was everywhere that Hitler had taken over. So you can see a lot of orange on that map. And the countries that Hitler gobbled up in that first year of the phony war were all in this area. Okay, so he gobbled up Denmark, Norway up at the top, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg, which you can't see on this map. Of course, on top of what he had already gobbled up over here. So, and then he went down, the war even went down here to Africa. Okay? That was how far this war spread out. So, you can see all that. Now, red is Italy. Okay? So, the red is Italy's conquest. So, Italy got Ethiopia first. And, of course, over here, later on, over here, they got into Albania and Greece as well, Italy. And then the pink is the Soviet Union. Don't forget about those guys. And they weren't like these, they weren't fighting with the bad guys, but they still took over land too. They annexed the top over up there. Okay, so all those other countries besides Russia, they annexed. And then they went in and invaded Finland. So, just wanted to show you that map. I think it kind of really shows the extent of territory taken over in this war, and the heat of it anyway. Okay, so the country gobbling continued. Blitz. Okay, Hitler used blitzkrieg to get into more countries, and he invaded. How many countries did I mention? 5 more countries in that first year, with the Allies sitting back on their hands, not doing much except trying to blockade the Germans and support the Polands a little bit. Okay? Let's go over here. Okay, moving over. Okay. And of course, you can't see that because the light's on. There we go. Okay, so Hitler's 3 mistakes. Okay, so what I want to share with you is the beginning of Hitler's mistakes. So after the phony war was over, spring of 1940, Hitler did the big invasion into France. Hitler wanted France just for revenge from World War I. Germans wanted revenge on France, so he went into France, took it over. Actually, the Italians went into France first, took it over, and then Germany went in, and between the two of them, France was forced to surrender. But this was his first mistake. Dunkirk, France, okay, the spring of 1940, because he had 330,000 British and French trapped on the beaches, sitting target, right there, waiting to be a sitting target. Hitler did not order a full attack because Hitler believed that Britain would still just give up and surrender. So he said, no, don't go in and fully attack them there because it's not going to matter because they're going to give up. But what happened? This was a miracle because what happened was all these British and French escaped because the British got small little ships over there off the English Channel and got them all over to the port of South Britain, so they all escaped. So Hitler let all these men escape from Dunkirk. First big mistake Hitler did, because what happened was these guys created a front line for Britain, so more of a front line defense for Britain. They came back a couple years later and started the liberation of Africa to get the our enemies out of Africa. And many were a part of the D-Day landings, which I'm going to talk about in a brief second. So that was his first big mistake, okay, was that. Dunkirk, France. And so, bear with me for a second. I'm back. Okay, I just lost a note. So that was his first big mistake. Second big mistake was Operation Barbarossa. Okay, so what happened? What was Operation Barbarossa? Well, Hitler decided to go in and invade the USSR, or the Soviet Union. That was what they were called at the time, the Soviet Union, or USSR. Despite the fact that he had made a pact with them in August of 1939, they had made a pact, a Soviet-German pact, that they would not use aggression on each other. But Hitler, of course, we all know he didn't keep his word or keep his promises, so he reneged that. And actually, he tried to bomb Britain right out of the war before this. Tent bombing over Britain for quite some time, but Britain would not give in. So he said, okay, to heck with Britain. I'm going to go for bigger land. I'm going to go into Russia. So he started to do that. But big mistake. Big, huge mistake. Because Russia is big. Russia has some power. And not only that, but he went and helped the Italians and some of their conquests in Africa. They were in trouble, so he went over and helped them. 6-week delay in getting into Russia. And then what happened? Winter came. And the Germans really underestimated the winter in Russia. It gets very cold. Brrr. That's what I got there, guys. Brrr, cold. So, at first they were able to get into Russia quite deeply. But a couple years after that, they start to not be very well prepared. They start to lose a few men. Men freeze to death, actually. And that's going to be a huge, huge mistake that Hitler made going into Russia. Okay. All right. Come over here with me, folks. We're moving over again. Isn't this fun? Fun with history. Isn't this fun? Okay. We are at this sheet now. December 7th, 1941. Something huge happened in the war. And it was a turning point as well. Pearl Harbor. And you can see here I got what happens is this is a U.S. naval base in Pearl Harbor, which is in Hawaii. And it has a lot of ships on it. These are ships. So the Japanese decide to go in and attack them. Okay? Remember our Japanese friends over in the Pacific? They're in a war as well, and they actually are part of the Tripartite Pact with Germany and Italy. They signed that in September of 1940. So it was basically another smart move by Hitler to sign this pact, because it was a pact between the three countries, and they said, listen, if the U.S. ever declared war on any of us, that we would all declare war on the USA. We're in this together, so we're going to keep the USA neutralized as much as we can. Back to the Soviet-Russian pact, that was a smart move at the time as well by Hitler, because it allowed him to not have the war on two fronts. And of course, we all know they had war on two fronts in World War I, and that's a tough thing to do, have war on two fronts. But Hitler reneged on it anyway and caused war on two fronts anyway. So, Pearl Harbor. Okay, back to this. So, it was a surprise attack by the Japanese. It was really a strategy by the Japanese. They wanted to keep the boats from interfering with their plans in Southeast Asia versus the overseas territories. Okay, so they were going to attack some overseas territories in Southeast Asia, which included the UK, the Netherlands, and the USA. So they were like, you know what? Let's surprise attack them so that we keep these boats at bay and they don't interfere. Well, the problem was this really made the Americans mad. They said, this is not nice. And so we're in this now. You cannot do this to our base. 8 ships were damaged, 4 sunk, 188 aircraft damaged, and the most important thing, 2,403 Americans dead, over 1,000 Americans injured. So that lit it up. And the Americans came into the war, okay? just like that. And that was not a good thing because Americans are pretty strong, and to get them involved in the war was not a smart idea by the Japanese, although I guess they thought that between them and Germany and Italy they could handle the Americans, but obviously they, in the end, could not handle them. Okay, let's move over. We're rotating again, back to here, back to this little sign, okay? So, this leads us to Hitler's third mistake that he made, and that was that right after, 2 days after Pearl Harbor, the USA declared war on Japan, and thus, right after that, the USA, Germany, and Italy, and Japan all declared war on the USA. So the war declaration on the USA was Hitler's third mistake in December of 41. Why? Because the USA is a strong power. And so he was getting into a war with the USA as well. And that ended up being a bad mistake on Hitler's part too. But he had to, though. He had to abide by the pact, although he never abided by too many pacts, but he had to abide by the tripartite pact that he had made. So that was Hitler's third mistake. Okay, so back to Russia here, okay? The cold winters in Russia eventually caught up with the Germans. 1943, there was a battle called Stalingrad, okay, a big city in Russia that Hitler was trying to acquire. And what happened was major losses taken at Stalingrad, okay? Major losses. And the Germans lost a lot of soldiers. Their biggest loss of the war up to this point. And it eventually led up to 1944, where instead of the Russians, for a lot of this time, the Soviets were just trying to defend their country. But after Stalingrad, the Soviets got a lot of offensive power back, and they got a lot of army back, and they turned around and started to pressure the Germans. And so instead of defending, they were pressuring them and actually being on the offensive, and the Germans started to go on the run in 1944. So Soviets, invading Soviet Union was not a good idea by Hitler. Ended up, that's where they started to lose the war, and the Soviets started to go after them, chase them, and the Germans were on the run. Okay, so they were starting to lose. Okay, let's go back to, where are we going now? We're going to this, a huge thing that happened in World War II. Just bear with me for a second here, people. Okay, bear with me here. All right. There we go. Okay. And I should have done this already, folks. I am going to talk about a large undercover operation. What happened to me? What happened? I'm undercover. Ha 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 ha. I'm undercover. Get it? But actually, this is what this whole thing was about, okay? We are talking about D-Day, June 6, 1944, and my grandpa was actually part of this invasion. So this is a very key invasion. June 6, 1944. Undercover. It was the world's largest amphibious undercover operation to date. Okay? So, undercover amphibious tanks were under the English Channel, and they tricked the Germans in a way because the Germans thought that the Allies were up to something but they thought they would be invading in a different place coming into France, but they made it look like they were invading there, and they actually came in on the beaches of Normandy, okay? So Normandy, France, they landed by 5 beaches in Normandy: Utah, Omaha, Go, Juno, and Sword beaches in Normandy, France. And this was key because we have a Western Front opening now, okay? And this was key because they had already gotten into Africa, and actually May 13th, 1943, after getting into Africa and penetrating in there, the Allies, the Axis, surrendered all territory in Africa on that date. And they had actually already gotten into Italy from Africa, although Hitler actually took over the northern part of Italy for a while, because Italy, he could not let them surrender when the Allies got into Italy in 1943. But they got in June 1943, and the new guy in charge, because Mussolini was put in jail, he later, the Germans got Mussolini out of jail, but a new guy was in charge, and he agreed to a ceasefire with the Allies on September 3rd. So we had already had some ground made by this point, folks, but D-Day was huge because it opened up a front in the West for the Allies to get in. Allies pushed back Germans and start making ground. The success was key to tricking the Germans, making Germans believe they were landing at Calais, France, not Normandy. Thus, the Germans did not finish all their fortifications, neither did they have air superiority, okay? So they tricked the Germans. Germans fell for it. Not to say they didn't suffer major losses, but they got in on D-Day, made great advances, and they suffered losses, but not enough to keep them pushing in. So they got in to France. August 25th, just a little over 2 months later, Paris was actually liberated from German control. By December, virtually all of France, most of Belgium, part of the Sutherlands are all liberated, and the Allies are pushing eastward, onwards to Germany. Yeah, major turning point in the war. So, back to the Eastern Front, of course. As I said, the Germans are being pushed back by the Soviets, and the Soviets are actually coming after them now, so they're chasing the Germans, more or less. And now the Germans are facing all this pressure from the Western side. So things are starting to crash in for Germany, okay? So what happened by the early year of 1945, January 1st, the Germans are in retreat after a failed attempt to reconquer Belgium. And they were trying to split the Allied forces, but they were not successful. January 27th, Soviet forces officially entered Germany. And on April 30th, the Soviets are now closing in on Berlin, Germany. And Hitler knows Germany is about to be defeated. So what does Hitler do? He's deep in a bunker in Berlin, Germany, and he had just married somebody. Somebody married Hitler. And him and his recently new wife commit suicide. This is April 30th, 1945. May 7th, 1945, Germany officially surrenders, putting an end to the war in Europe. But Japan is still in the war, and the U.S. are heavily fighting them over in the Pacific. So we still got the Japanese to deal with, okay? So, the Japanese... Hello, I'm back again. Hello. The Japanese, okay, just to let you know, the Japanese had gotten into China, Burma, Hong Kong, Guam, Philippines, and Wake and Midway Islands. So the Japanese people are starting to take a lot over too. This brings us to our last point here today, is the 6th point over here. I'll turn that light off for you. Okay, so two big bombs. Two big bombs. Okay, so the Americans were trying to still deal with the Japanese. The Japanese still wanted to keep fighting over in the Pacific. So what happened? Well, this happened in 1939. Fison. You can see at the top I got Fison. German chemists in 1939 had discovered a very powerful weapon. That's nuclear fission. Fison. I don't think I'm saying that right, but basically they discovered nuclear energy. And these were German chemists. So somebody found out about this and told the USA. Basically they said, hey, USA, heads up. Germany has discovered nuclear energy, and if they start to build something that has the potential for a bomb, this could be very bad and dangerous because this is Nazi Germany. So the USA got the heads up and they started a project called the Manhattan Project. It was a code word given by the Army for it. And the USA started to work on nuclear bombs. And they started to build them, and they were doing them in different states throughout the USA. But basically, the biggest area that they had a very successful test was in New Mexico. Okay, so in New Mexico, they tested it. It seemed to work well. So now we're in August of 1945, and in August 6th, the USA had actually met in Congress about this decision, and the president of the USA at the time felt like he basically said, listen, the casualties are going to be horrible on our men. If we keep fighting, if we're going to get into Japan probably and get them out of the war, but the casualties we're going to suffer in the meantime are going to be horrible and devastating. So they weighed the options and they said, listen, you know what? I think, you know how we get the Japanese out of the war? We're going to drop an atomic bomb on them. Okay? So what they did in August 6, 1945 is they dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, Japan. Okay? Devastated the city. And in fact, if you read first-hand accounts of it, people will say it was like the city was on fire. It will say, they use the word like the city evaporated. Big mushroom cloud of smoke in the air covering the city. People with blisters all over their hands that weren't close to it, but still close enough. And windows shattering all over the place. It's quite powerful. So this is what happened on August 6th in Hiroshima. And the Americans sat back and thought, oh, the Japanese are going to surrender. The Japanese will give us a call and say, you know what? You guys win. We're out of this. But they did not. They did not. So 3 days later, August 9th, 1945, the Americans went ahead and dropped a second atomic bomb on Nagasaki. Okay, a place in Japan, Nagasaki. They dropped a second atomic bomb on them. And then finally, after two scares like this, on August 14th, Japanese called up the Americans. Ring! Hello? This is the USA. Hello? Japanese called them up and said, you know what? Let's get a principle arranged in... Let's get a thing arranged in principle to surrender because, we're afraid of... we don't want any more bombs. So we want to surrender. So August 14th, they did that. Principle of surrender. September 2nd, 1945, they officially surrendered, officially ending World War II. Okay? So that was World War II for you. I tried to run it through you as quick as I could, but hopefully you understand all that and got the point of it. But basically, the things that you need to be aware of, I told you about. Of course, I never touched on the Holocaust. And maybe the Holocaust is something I'll talk about briefly next week. Basically, the Holocaust was a very bad thing that happened as part of World War II as well. It was called Hitler's Inhumane Plan, and his plan was to kill 11 million Jews from 31 cities. 11 million. He was successful at 6 million of them. So he wasn't completely successful at it, but successful enough. And there's 3 different kinds of camps that he had done with it: Poland, Germany, and different areas of Europe. So he basically, in Poland, had extermination camps. That's where they were sent, and they were directly killed there. Germany, he had concentration camps where he kept a lot of Nazi enemies prisoner. Okay. Not necessarily Jews, but anybody who was an enemy, he kept them prisoner there. And then different areas of Europe, he had the most worst camps of all, slave camps. So what happened there was they were basically tortured to death. So he made them do all this hard labor, and they didn't usually have enough nutrition or food given to them, and so a lot of them died from lack of nutrition combined with hard work. So that was the Holocaust, briefly. And if you want a really good movie on this, Schindler's List is one that you should watch. I have not personally watched it yet, but I have heard many good things about that movie, how accurate it is, if you can handle that kind of thing. So that was the Holocaust. Very bad thing. Lots of bad things happened in World War II. It was not a very good war. And we're going to get into the aftermath of it next week. But this was World War II for you, okay? So I tried to go over the main points of it with you and how the war was won by the Allies. Basically a combination of Hitler's dumb mistakes combined with starting small and growing big. I guess that's a way you can put it, because he found a way to get into Africa first and get Africa taken care of that had the enemy, that had a German occupation in there. Then they got into Italy, booted Italy out of the war with that advancement into Italy. And then, of course, the D-Day landings were huge. Without the D-Day landings, I don't think the Allies could have won. Soviets were certainly pressuring the Germans on the east, but without that Western Front opening, might have been a different story. So this was World War II for you folks, and the course of it. So I hope that you got a lot out of this. This was World War II Part 2, the course of the war. Okay, so next week I'm going to talk about the aftermath of the war. It could be the week after, actually. Next weekend's Labor Day weekend. Might have plans for that weekend, I'm not sure. But next week, next time, it's going to be the aftermath of World War II. So please come back to get that. So I hope that this was helpful. I hope you learned a lot and had fun at the same time. This has been Fun with History with Professor Banks.